At 8:35 p.m. on the 14th of November 2015, police received a phone call from a man claiming they had found a human skull and some bones in the remote Clocaenog Forest. Local police made their way out to the area where the caller was located, meeting with two brothers Andrew and Mark Middle, one of which made the call. They directed the officers to the location of said skull and bones, which were in a small clearing of dense trees just off a gravel road, where the police confirmed the remains were in fact human. The Clocaenog Forest is a beautiful forest lying in the heart of Mynydd Hiraethog, taking its name from the village of Clocaenog near Ruthin in Denbighshire, North Wales. The 15,000-acre forest was planted in 1905 and is under the control of Natural Resources Wales. Its magnificent trees are home to the last remnants of the red squirrel, increasingly rare black grouse, and many other birds. The many quiet roads and idyllic scenery is the perfect place for a family outing. Unfortunately, its immense size probably helps to try and hide a lot of secrets, like Peter Moore's stabbing and burial location of 28-year-old Edward Carthy in 1995, which were found several weeks later, or 47-year-old Richard Sumner's suicide in 2002, after he handcuffed himself to a tree and threw away the key. The artist had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1984, and as his illness worsened he gave up his work. Having to rely on government benefits as his form of income, he became increasingly depressed, believing he was nothing but a parasite. He had tried to kill himself in Clocaenog Forest twice before, once in 1996 where he managed to free himself after 4 days, and the second was in 1999. Richard was missing until 2005 where he was found by a woman walking her dog. Another secret the forest tried to hide were the remains of someone found on the 14th of November 2015 by Andrew and Mark, who were out to view the Wales Rally GB. The Wales Rally GB has used the rugged and gravelly paths as tracks in the Clocaenog Forest for a number of years, and in the 2015 rally, which was running from the 12th to the 15th of November, the gruesome discovery was made about 100 yards away from the SS16 and 19 tracks that ran along the Llynbrennig Reservoir, Gepenter Llyn on the Denby Moors. Andrew and Mark were out camping about 400 yards away from the 2015 Wales Rally GB SS16 and 19 track, which was happening the next day. The brothers set up a campfire and had themselves a few cans to reminisce about previous rallies they had attended while they enjoyed the wilderness. Mark had eventually realised the fire had begun to die down, so he went to look for more firewood, leaving Andrew on his own. This is when the discovery was made. Just 100 yards away from the brothers' campfire, he was searching the overgrown dense floor with his handheld torch, coming across some bones. He then got his brother to help him inspect the area closer, quickly discovering what they believed to be a human skull only a few metres away, and that's when one of the brothers made the phone call to the North Wales Police. The investigation began sometime after 8:35 p.m. and was led by Detective Superintendent John Hanson, where the area was cordoned off from the general public to maximise all evidence recovery. The police immediately took notice of a fracture on the skull, deeming the victim's death as suspicious, and forensic investigators slowly started to recover the remains and fingertip search the area over a 5-week period. The remains were completely decomposed at this point and were densely covered in moss and overgrowth. It took 2 weeks for almost an entire skeleton to be recovered, and forensic anthropologists and biologists used forest samples and the remains to determine how old they were. 2 severely destroyed articles of clothing were also found near the remains, which were sent to forensic pathologists. Pathologists determined that the remains were that of a male born before 1950, aged at least 54 years old, but more likely to be in his 60s. He would have been between 5'8" and 5'10.5" inches tall, and were able to ascertain that John Doe's cause of death was due to blunt force trauma to the head. Forensic anthropologists and biologists were able to establish the remains were deposited in the location between 1995 and 2005, meaning the body could have potentially been over 20 years old. However, the police believe the victim was killed elsewhere and deposited at the site between 2004 and 2010, and bones showed multiple key injuries that could help identify the John Doe as well. He once received a broken nose sometime in his early life, however it would have been barely noticeable. He would have been suffering from arthritis and inflammatory problems in his spine and other joints, and at some point had spinal surgery where the vertebrae was fused together, which would have made movement painful and very limited. It is also believed the victim had some kind of wrist injury. From examining the teeth and jawbones, forensic odontologist Dr. John Rosey concluded that the John Doe wasn't very aware of his dental hygiene in his early life, as he had lost a large number of teeth, as evident of 12 missing posterior molars and 1 missing upper molar, which would have resulted in sunken-in cheeks. But it was clear the John Doe had extensive and expensive dental work done to them later in life, which included crown work, root canal work, and filling work, which would have been done between 1980 and 2000. Forensic odontologist Dr. John Rosey told journalists, Specialist dental work has been done on the crown between 1980 and 2000, and the highly distinctive nature of the work could lead to identification. He had not been dentally aware in his early life, and he had lost all of his 12 posterior molars and one upper premolar, so he went to great lengths to have some extensive dental treatment done of very high quality. The last two pieces of evidence were two articles of clothing found at the scene, police believe may have been the John Doe's. First was an extra large dark green V-neck Pringle of Scotland jumper, which is confirmed to have been manufactured between 2000 and 2005. The other article was a label for a maroon Marks & Spencer's men's underwear, which were UK, Canada size large, Europe size 4, waist size 36 inches to 39 inches, and was confirmed to have been manufactured in 1999. Pathologists were able to create a full DNA profile of the John Doe from his remains. Unfortunately, there weren't any matches in the DNA National Database and the database for UK missing persons, which meant that a John Doe had not been reported as a missing person in the UK. Over the coming months, the North Wales Police made inquiries throughout Wales, which resulted in no leads. Journalists dubbed the John Doe as the Clocaenog Forest man, and it wasn't until April 2016 when another investigation went underway, starting with a detailed dental report of Dr. John Rosie's findings in the British Dental Journal, which included more details about the teeth, which dentists would understand, and a picture of the upper jawbone was also included, in the hopes the dentist or dentists involved in the John Doe's dentistry would recognise their work. A photo of the lower jawbone was released to the press along with Dr. John Rosie's findings as well. North Wales Police also revealed they would be conducting a familial DNA of the John Doe, hoping to find a family member or even a distant relative to help narrow down the Clocaenog Forest man's identity. 6 months passed and no one came forward. In September 2016, North Wales Police appeared on BBC's Crime Watch show with some new developments that will hopefully identify the John Doe and then move on to figuring out who killed him and why. On the episode, which was aired on the 26th of September 2016, some professionals were interviewed, which included Detective Superintendent Iestyn Davies of North Wales Police, who is now leading the investigation, Professor Caroline Wilkinson, Director of Face Labs, and forensic odontologist Dr. John Rosie, along with the brothers Mark and Andrew. Dr. John Rosie reiterated what was already written in multiple articles since the remains were recovered and analysed, coupled with new X-ray images of the teeth. Detective Superintendent Iestyn Davies detailed where and how the body was found, what the key pieces of evidence were along with a new development, a facial reconstruction of the John Doe. Face Labs were tasked with reconstructing the John Doe's face, and the Director of Face Labs, Professor Caroline Wilkinson, detailed how Face Labs managed to do this, describing the process for Crime Watch audience. We look at the skull, and from the shape and size of the skull, and the position and degree of the muscle attachments, we predict the shape of the muscles, and from the shape of the muscles, we predict the shape of the face. We take measurements to assess the teeth to tell us about the lips, we look at the sides and base of the skull to tell us about the ears, we look at the orbits to tell us about the eyes. We can slowly build the skull into the facial appearance of the living individual. Professor Caroline Wilkinson went on to describe how the John Doe may have looked. This face is quite a strong male face, quite deep-set eyes. Although the nose was previously broken, it looks quite straight, and because of the loss of a large number of teeth, he would have had sunken cheeks. He hasn't got a credibly characteristic face, he hasn't got a massive nose or a cleft chin, but hopefully the overall appearance should spark something. If somebody knew him, they may be able to recognise something in there. The Face Labs team were able to reconstruct 3 images of the John Doe at 3 different stages in his life, his 50s, 60s and 70s. Attributes such as eye colour, skin complexion, any hair and facial hair colour could not be determined. With this, the police hoped an identification would come about soon. After the episode had aired, there were supposedly over 30 calls made to the North Wales Police in regards to the Clocaenog Forest man, but ultimately no leads were made and the investigation continued. However, in March of 2017, serial killer Peter Moore contacted the police to discuss the identity of the John Doe. Peter Howard Moore was born on the 19th of September 1946 in St Helens, Lancashire. He and his family moved to the North Wales area sometime in 1950. He was a massive film buff and a homosexual in a time when it was illegal in the United Kingdom, but he used this to his advantage when he would sexually assault upwards of 39 men over a span of 20-year period. Most men didn't report these attacks due to feeling ashamed and worried they could be labelled as a homosexual. He ran small independent cinemas in Baghill, Holyhead, Kinmel Bay and Denbigh in North Wales, and was considered a gentleman and pillar of the community to locals. But behind closed doors, Peter grew a fascination for fascism and would regularly wear black shoes, trousers, shirts and ties, which were in contrast to his effeminate demeanour. He would then use the cinemas he ran to host his secret live sadomasochism sex shows for other secret homosexual men. But as his lust for sadism and power over men grew, Peter Moore became increasingly more dangerous until his craving for violence turned to murder in 1995. Peter Moore was caught and convicted with a life imprisonment in 1996 for stabbing 4 men to death and mutilating their bodies for sexual gratification. Peter's victims were 56-year-old Henry Roberts in September, 28-year-old Edward Carthy in October, 49-year-old Keith Randalls in November, and 40-year-old Anthony Davis in December. During his conviction, Peter told the jury the acts were actually committed by his fictitious lover named Jason, nicknamed after Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise, and subsequently, due to his black attire, he was dubbed the Man in Black. One of his victims, 28-year-old Edward Carthy, was stabbed to death and found buried in a shallow grave in the Clocaenog Forest several weeks after the murder. Moore met with police at his request in Wakefield Prison. He suggested the identity of the Clocaenog Forest man was a mature student from Aberystwyth University who went missing in 1996. He did not name the student, but newspaper reports identified a 46-year-old student from Aberystwyth University named Roger Evans, who mysteriously disappeared on the 16th of January 1986. Roger Evans was born circa 1952 in Bradley of Stoke-on-Trent. He was a minor in the village until he moved to Aberystwyth to attend university to study economics. A few days before his disappearance on the 16th, Roger called his mother to let her know of his good exam results. During the investigation of his disappearance, his car was found abandoned on Bourth Beach, just a few miles away from Aberystwyth University, but ultimately found no indication that Roger Evans drowned. Just 2 years later, in 1998, Roger Evans' mother passed away, and his sister, Lynn Booth, spoke to BBC 4 years later in 2002, commenting, "My mother died of a broken heart 4 years ago, which was terrible. If she ever went out to the house, she used to leave notes in case Roger came back while she was out." Unfortunately, the police discounted Peter Moore's theory due to conflicting dates, with the Daily Post seeing a letter written by Peter Moore after his meeting that read, "I saw the police about it as I believed I knew who it was. This has been discounted due to the dates. The man, a mature student from the university at Aberystwyth, has been missing since 1996. The skeleton found by men attending a car rally is in exactly the same place as Edward Carthy was found and who I was found guilty of murdering." Following the letter by Peter Moore, Detective Superintendent Justin Davis had this to say, "We have, at his request, spoken to Peter Moore, but we continue to appeal to anyone in the community who can help identify this man and offer any information which would progress the investigation. Although the description that we have of the man remains limited at this time, we hope more information will come to light which will lead to his identification and help establish the full circumstances around his death. It is not confirmed whether or not Peter Moore was in fact referring to Roger Evans, as he never named him, nor have police ever confirmed this, or whether where the John Doe was found is the same place Edward Carthy was buried. And to this day, Roger Evans is still a missing person. He'll be 72 years old this year. Peter claims Roger Evans was discounted as a potential victim due to conflicting dates, as police still firmly believe the clothes found near the John Doe were his, meaning he would have disappeared much later than Roger Evans. His age is also another significant reason to discount him. At 46 years old, Roger was 8 years younger than the John Doe, and since he was more likely to be in his 60s, he was at least 14 years younger than the murder victim. Finally, in October of the same year, 2017, the North Wales Police support officers and race marshals distributed flyers of the John Doe at the 2017 Wales Rally GB. This included pictures of the reconstructed face in 3 stages of his life, along with information on when he is believed to be born and when police believed he went missing, along with contact information, which ultimately brought about no new leads, and the case has since gone cold. With Peter inserting himself into the investigation, it's not hard to wonder whether or not Peter had anything to do with the John Doe's demise, considering it's very common for serial killers to involve themselves into investigations surrounding their murders in some capacity, either directly or indirectly. Directly inserting oneself would involve talking to the police conducting the investigation, or in some way becoming the centre of attention over the case, or rarely they sometimes confess to it so no one else gets the credit of their work. For example, in the Soham murders, Ian Huntley went to the police claiming he saw Jessica Chambers and Holly Wells just before they disappeared, becoming the last known person to see the girls, and would ask odd and very specific questions in regards to the case, knowing full well he had murdered both. His direct involvement led to his downfall, as police took notice of his strange behaviour and unusual obsessive nature over the case, subsequently investigating Ian and convicted him for the murder of Jessica and Holly. Indirectly inserting oneself would involve actions like calling, writing, or sending recordings to the police and even the media to taunt or boast about their crimes. This can also include returning to the scene of the crime to observe police and detectives. For example, infamous serial killer the Zodiac Killer would send cryptic letters to the press and police, wanting both to try and catch him over the murder of 5 people and injuring 2 between 1968 and 1969, and claiming to have killed 37 other people, but to this day he has not been identified. Serial killers suffering from psychopathy typically display persistent antisocial behaviour such as bold and egotistical traits, like inserting themselves into the investigation to fuel their narcissism over the investigators. The fact that Peter Moore states the Clocaenog Forest man was found in the exact same place as Edward Carthy, it does beg the question, did Peter Moore have something to do with the Clocaenog Forest man? The age and gender match Peter's MO, the location is apparently the same as Edward Carthy's burial, and serial killers are known to use the same location more than once. Take for example the Moores murders, where Saddleworth Moor was used as a deposition site for all 4 child victims of serial killer couple Ian Brady and Myra Hindley between July 1963 and October 1965. Forensic anthropologists and biologists determined the body had been deposited at the site between 1995 and 2005. 1995 is the same year Moore committed his murders, and he did purposely insert himself into the investigation when the case was beginning to lose traction. This is all pure conjecture, of course, and there are discrepancies to be noted. Firstly, if the John Doe was murdered in 1995 and left in the exact same place as Edward Carthy was, as Peter claims, how come the police never found the body when investigation began with the area where Carthy was? If the clothes were that of the John Does, like the police believe they are, that would put his death and deposition between 2004 and 2005. Unless the victim was definitely murdered prior to 1996, it would have been impossible for Peter Moore to have committed the crime. It's been 5 years since the end of the last investigation, and the case is still open. However, there have been no new leads, evidence or potential victims, and the murderer could still potentially be walking the streets. As of 2022, Iestyn Davis retired from the police force back in April of 2019, after 30 years of service starting in April 1989. In January of the same year of retirement, Iestyn Davis registered his own business named Blue Line Partnership. He began full-time working on his business in May of the same year, lending his experiences to deliver a range of services to the public, like media consultancy, TV interviews, documentaries, news programs, lecturing and presentations, delivering at UK-wide universities and colleges, review and panel work, review ongoing cold case investigation, general investigations across the public and private sectors of the UK. He uses experiences and knowledge from working as Detective Superintendent, Head of Force Major Incident Team and Serious and Organised Crime Unit, where he led numerous high-profile and complex cases such as Operation Orbicola, which was the reinvestigation into the killing of Janet Commons in the town of Flint in 1976. Operation York was the murder investigation of Mark Mason, who was stabbed to death in Home Bargains car park on the 27th of October 2016. Operation Bronze was the investigation into the murder of veterinary surgeon Catherine Going in Mould in 2012, and how the killer Clive Sharp was identified and captured. Operation Grice was the investigation of Nicholas Churchton, who was murdered in March 2017. Operation Rodan was the investigation of Emma Baum, who was murdered in July 2016 in Pennygross. Operation Teal was the investigation into another County Lines drug-related gang killing. And of course, Operation Tractile, the investigation into an unidentified body and murder of a man whose skeleton was found within Clocaenog Forest in 2015. Professor Caroline Wilkinson is currently the Director for Liverpool School of Art and Design at Liverpool John Moores University since 2014, and is the Director for Face Labs Art and Design at Liverpool John Moores University since 2014. She's made a number of notable facial reconstructions since working at Face Labs. In 2013, Wilkinson created a facial reconstruction of King Richard III. The same year, in December of 2013, Wilkinson created a facial reconstruction of St. Nicholas, and finally in 2016 she helped create a facial reconstruction of Robert the Bruce, who was the King of Scots from 1306 to 1329. Online theorists seem to agree that John Doe was once a wealthy man, middle class at the lowest, with user Lynn Sardine having this to say. The unusual thing about this for me is the fact that he was a wealthy man, yet has not been identified. It's hard to imagine someone who paid to make their teeth look good and had nice looking clothes had lived a completely isolated life. To be that well off, he must have had a high paying job, which would mean he would have been known to many people in whatever company he worked for. Unless he had inherited fortune from a wealthy family, but even that would suggest he would have family who would have reported him missing. And it's surprising no one who thinks they're even distantly related has come forward with information, because they believe they might have a stake in his inheritance. People usually follow the money. He must have lived in a nice house which is either sat empty right now, or whoever lived with him knows something. Someone knows this guy and is insane. And the user The Fitcher said, "It is really strange that someone who appears to be well off and middle class to not be missed by anyone." The same user theorized 2 possible explanations as to why this person hasn't been reported. He could have been an unmarried man who lived alone in an isolated house. Therefore, there's simply no one to miss him. No siblings, no children, no neighbours, bills paid by direct debit. Conceivably, it could take a while before anyone to know that they're gone. The other less likely explanation is that those close to him either arranged or committed his murder themselves, which would explain why he wasn't reported missing. Not exactly conducive of staying out of prison. Another user by the name of Britkit believes that John Doe could potentially have been a foreigner. That's why he doesn't appear in the UK DNA database or the UK Missing Persons database, and that's why there wasn't much talk regarding him when he disappeared. There are a lot of holiday second homes in rural areas like North Wales, Cornwall, and so on. It is possible they only lived in the area 3 weeks out of the year. Him going missing didn't generate much gossip because the locals assumed he'd sold the place. In the United Kingdom, unfortunately, upwards of 170,000 people go missing each year. Nearly 98,000 of those are adults and more than 70,000 are children, and around 100 to 150 bodies go unidentified each year. It's possible the Clocaenog Forest man has been missing for upwards of 27 years at this point, and with no more leads being generated, he may remain unidentified for some time until the right person hears of this case. Please, if you have any new information regarding the Clocaenog Forest man, follow the link in the description to Missing Persons Unit and fill out the form. If you know where Roger Evans is or have seen a sighting, please follow the link to the Missing People website to report a sighting. On the 14th of November of this year, it would have been 7 years since the body of the John Doe was found. Thank you so much for listening to the Unsettling True Crime Podcast. And as a thanks from us at Unsettling, if you check the description of this episode and follow the Google Doc link, you will be taken to the document used to research this case. This includes a timeline of events, investigation information, evidence, suspects, sightings, any unusual developments, theories, maps, photos, and finally the script used for this episode. You will be able to comment, share your theories, or link any articles with important information we may have missed on this case. The document also includes every reference used to build this case as well.